The wren, the king of birds, St. Stephen's Day was killed in the furze. Although he be little, his honour is great, and so, good people, pray give us a treat. Hello and welcome to Handed Down, where we celebrate traditional songs and the people who collect and preserve and sing them. I'm Jenny Shaw and I hope you're having a lovely festive time right now. This year's Christmas special isn't a carol for a change. It is instead a savage song about a great gang of men hunting and killing a tiny little bird in the most dramatic and ritualistic way, because this little wren is very hard to kill. He can't be hunted with bows and arrows, but he requires big guns and big cannons. This song accompanies an actual hunt of the wren, which traditionally takes place on the 26th of December, which is also known as St. Stephen's Day. Now, many years ago when I was a student, I would walk down the banks of the River Wear most days, and quite often I'd hear a wren in the undergrowth, sometimes singing right in my ear, and they're very loud. But always very welcome. I've always had an affinity for wrens. Being called Jenny, that tends to happen. And I did welcome this little companion. I knew as well that he was the king of birds. And it was around this time that I first heard the Cutty Wren. William Harrison, who was one of the founders of the Manx Society, gives us an account of the custom of hunting the wren. Writing in the mid-19th century, he says, "This custom is still kept up on St. Stephen's Day, chiefly by boys who at early dawn sally out armed with long sticks, beating the bushes until they find one of these birds, when they commence the chase with great shoutings, following it from bush to bush. It is suspended in a garland of ribbons, flowers and evergreens. The procession then commences, carrying that king of birds, as the Druids call it, from house to house, soliciting contributions and giving a feather for good luck. These are considered an effectual preservation from shipwreck, and some fishermen will not yet venture out to sea without having first provided themselves with a few of these feathers to ensure their safe return. The drain, or wren's feathers, are considered an effectual preservation against witchcraft. It was formerly the custom in the evening to inter the naked body of the wren with great solemnity in a secluded corner of the churchyard, and conclude the evening with wrestling and all manner of sports." Harrison also gives us the song that the so-called Wren Boys sang, which was taken down in 1843. We also have a tune for it, which is published without words in a book called Mona Melodies, Mona being the name for the Isle of Man. And that was by Charles Barrow from 1820. So two men involved in bringing this together. Now, I played a bit of it at the start of the show, but here's what it sounds if you put the words and the tune together. "We'll away to the woods," says Robin to Bobbin. "We'll away to the woods," said Richard to Robin. "We'll away to the woods," says Jack of the land. "We'll away to the woods," says everyone. The wren song, also known as the Cutty Wren or the Little Wren, is a strange and savage thing, and it seems to rain down stories wherever it goes. And where it goes to is islands and mountains and rural areas and fishing communities, all the out-of-the-way places where these stories and legends flourish. Many of these stories explain the reason for hunting the wren, which, let's be honest, is a really odd thing to do and probably does need some explaining. In his famous book, The Golden Bough, published in 1890, James Fraser likens the hunting of the wren with a Punjabi custom of taking a snake from house to house around the village for good luck, after which the snake was buried. But in this case, the snake wasn't hunted. In fact, it was made out of dough. So the practice is similar to the way that the wren is paraded around the village after the hunt, but not the hunt itself. And this is what Fraser has to say. "Ceremonies closely analogous to this Indian worship of the snake have survived in Europe into recent times, and doubtless date from a very primitive paganism. The best known example is the hunting of the wren by many European peoples, the ancient Greeks and Romans, the modern Italians, Spaniards, French, Germans, Dutch, Danes, Swedes, English and Welsh. The wren has been designated the king, the little king, the king of the birds, the hedge king, and so forth, and has been reckoned amongst those birds which it is extremely unlucky to kill. In England, it's supposed that if anyone kills a wren or harries its nest, he will infallibly break a bone or meet with some dreadful misfortune within the year. Sometimes it's thought that the cows will give bloody milk. Notwithstanding such beliefs, the custom of annually killing the wren has prevailed widely both in this country and in France. In the Isle of Man, down to the 18th century, the custom was observed on Christmas Eve, or rather on Christmas morning. On the 24th of December, towards evening, all the servants got a holiday. They did not go to bed all night, but rambled about until the bells rang in all the churches at midnight. When prayers were over, they went to hunt the wren, and having found one of these birds, they killed it and fastened it to the top of a long pole with its wings extended. Thus they carried it in procession to every house, chanting the following rhyme: "We hunted the wren for Robin the Bobbin, we hunted the wren for Jack of the Can, we hunted the wren for Robin the Bobbin, we hunted the wren for everyone." When they had gone from house to house and collected all the money they could, they laid the wren on a bier and carried it in procession to the parish churchyard, where they made a grave and buried it with the utmost solemnity, singing dirges over her in the Manx language, which they call her knell, after which Christmas begins. And then he goes on to say that the custom was also found in Ireland, where it was usually held on Christmas Day or St. Stephen's Day. He then describes the wren hunt in Carcassonne in the south of France, held on the first Sunday of December. The young people of the street Saint-Jean used to go out of the town armed with sticks with which they beat the bushes looking for wrens. The first to strike down one of these birds was proclaimed king. They then returned to the town in procession, headed by the king, who carried the wren on a pole. On the evening of the last day of the year, the king and all who had hunted the wren marched through the streets of the town to the light of torches, with drums beating and fifes playing in front of them. At the door of every house they stopped, and one of them wrote with chalk on the door, "Vive la roi," with the number of the year which was about to begin. On the morning of 12th day, the king again marched in procession with great pomp, wearing a crown and a blue mantle and carrying a sceptre. In front of him was borne the wren, fastened to the top of the pole, which was adorned with a verdant wreath of olive, of oak, and sometimes of mistletoe grown on an oak. After hearing high mass in the parish church of St. Vincent, surrounded by his officers and guards, the king visited the bishop, the mayor, the magistrates, and the chief inhabitants, collecting money to defray the expenses of the royal banquet, which took place in the evening and wound up with a dance. Now that sounds very civilised. But the hunting of the wren remains such an incongruous activity that over the years other stories have sprung up to attempt to explain why it happens. There is a strong sense of retcon here, as a lot of the explanations are not all that convincing. Friend of the podcast, John Aubrey, that brilliant and terminally disorganised Englishman from the 17th century, tells a story that he collected about the hunting of the wren. A party of the Protestants had been surprised sleeping by the Popish Irish, were it not for several wrens that had just wakened them, by dancing and pecking on the drums just as the enemy were approaching. For this reason, the wild Irish mortally hate these birds to this day, calling them the devil's servants and killing them wherever they can catch them. They teach their children to thrust them full of thorns. You'll see sometimes on a holiday a whole parish running like madmen from hedge to hedge, wren hunting. In Ireland, there's also a widely known legend that St. Stephen was betrayed by a wren's call when hiding from his accusers, leading to his death by stoning, making him the first Christian martyr after the death of Jesus. This is not how the story is told in the Bible, you will be surprised to know. In the Acts of the Apostles, the Sanhedrin, which was the religious court, hauls Stephen in for questioning, and he gives them a really long historical speech, which he then follows up by looking into the sky and having a vision of Jesus at God's right hand, at which point they immediately stone him to death. So there's not much scope there for any kind of Wren intervention. During the second folk revival in the 1960s, there were a lot of rumours going round that the Cutty Wren was linked to, and even written at the time of, the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. I can quite see how this origin story caught the mood of the time. Not only does it make the song very old indeed, which is always great, isn't it? But it also anchors it to a victory of the working man against his overlords, albeit quite a short-lived victory. Unlike the earlier folk revival at the start of the 20th century, the 60s revival was more of a working class movement, and it was a lot more anti-establishment. So I can see how it caught on. A.L. Lloyd, Bert Lloyd, a titan of the 60s folk revival, wrote this: "Some of the most ancient, most enduring, and at the same time most mysterious English folk songs are those concerned with the attributes and sacrifice of monstrous animals. At the end of the 14th century, when peasant rebellion was in the air, the old magical song of the gigantically powerful bird, presented by a kind of folklore irony as a tiny wren, took on a tinge of new meaning, for here was the story of a great fowl so hard to seize, so difficult to dismember, but so apt for sharing among the poor. And what did that suggest but a symbol of seigneurial property?" One of the great contributions that Bert Lloyd made to this song was to pair the words with the tune Green Bushes, which is the tune that we all know today, making it singable and catchy. But the Peasants' Revolt, it is a great story, and yet there's no real evidence that the song goes back that far, or that it has anything to do with the Peasants' Revolt at all. It seems most likely that this was wishful thinking on Bert Lloyd's part. I've always admired his creativity, and I suspect that he tended to put the story before all else, which is something I can totally get behind. Unfortunately, I'm going to be a little bit more pedantic for the purpose of this episode. However, the wren as a revolutionary symbol is there in folklore. He can be an overthrower of established power in some stories, such as how he became the king of the birds. Once upon a time, the birds decided that they needed a king. They agreed that the bird who could fly the highest would be crowned their ruler. On the appointed day, all the birds gathered and took to the skies, each striving to outdo the others. The eagle, with his powerful wings, soon soared above all the rest, and as he climbed higher and higher, the other birds began to tire and fall back to the ground, and it seemed certain that the eagle would be declared the king. However, unbeknown to the eagle, a clever little wren had hidden himself in the eagle's feathers. And when the eagle had reached the highest point he could manage, then the wren came out from the feathers, and by then the eagle was too exhausted to fly any higher. But the wren, having rested well in the eagle's wing, flew up and up into the blue sky. And when all the birds saw the wren flying high above the eagle, they declared him the king of the birds. This story is over 2,000 years old and may have been written or collected by Aesop, although we don't have the original, but it was popular enough to be mentioned by other Greek and Roman writers over the year. Its influence has been strong, and in many European languages the word for wren also means king. There are later stories in which the wren is already the king, and he doesn't hesitate to demonstrate his own power. The Brothers Grimm give us a German folk tale, The Bear and the Willow Wren, a strange little story about the wren angrily demonstrating his sovereignty of the forest by sending hornets down to sting all the animals who challenged or whispered against him. So in this story, the wren isn't the plucky little challenger of established power, but instead the despot, subduing a rebellion. Wren Day is still celebrated in some areas of Ireland with music and dancing and beer, and it sounds like great fun, and of course no actual wrens are harmed these days. But as to the song itself, Well, we can only trace it back directly to the 18th century, although of course it might be older. The earliest written version is from a book called Scots Songs, published in 1776 by David Hurst. And this is how it goes. Willsie go to the wood, quo Fosey Mosey. Willsie go to the wood, quo Johnny Rednosey. Willsie go to the wood, quo Foslineen. Willsie go to the wood, quoth brither and kin. Now, what strikes me about this version is that there's no sense of escalation. It's just a straightforward account of what they're going to do. They're going to flay the wren, get her home and eat her. And the wren, you notice, is female in this version. No big guns, no big cannons, no bloody big brass cauldrons, just killing a wren. And what it sounds like more than anything else is a nonsense rhyme, something just really silly with stock characters and maybe even a song for children. What it doesn't sound like is a political song. But the sentiment of the popular version we know today, what it represents or what it could represent, I think does tap into something deep in the psyche of the British Isles over the years. The wren may be tiny, but he's the king. And we're deeply ambivalent because while we revere and even love our lords and kings, at the same time, we deeply resent them. We stage a highly dangerous revolt and then we slink quietly back home on the back of some empty reassurances. We chop off their head and then we restore their son a few years later. We call for their abdication and then a few years on we happily celebrate the Platinum Jubilee, the Plattitubes. And I'm talking about us as a society here, not individuals who may well sit firmly in one camp or another. I think us folkies can tend a little bit towards republicanism, but at the same time, kings make for really good songs, don't they? In Ireland and her near neighbours, explanations for the song instead draw on battles with English invaders and occupiers. They talk of betrayal and martyrdom, and it's easy enough to see how this has caught the national imagination. One thing that perhaps unites us is that we are storytelling nations, with a particular fondness for the absurd. We can be serious in our political views and rebellious in our relationship with power and sovereignty. But at the same time, we do love a ridiculous song and our very odd traditions. Happy St. Stephen's Day.
Oh, where are you going, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. We're off to the woods, said John the Red-Nosed. We're off to the woods, said John the Red-Nosed. What will you do there, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. We'll hunt the Cutty Wren, said John the Red-Nosed. We'll hunt the Cutty Wren, said John the Red-Nosed. Oh, how will you shoot her, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. With bows and with arrows, said John the Red-Nosed. With bows and with arrows, said John the Red-Nosed. That will not do then, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, what will do then, said Fessel to Foes. Big guns and big cannons, said John the Red-Nosed. Big guns and big cannons, said John the Red-Nosed. How will you bring her home, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. On 4 strong men's shoulders, said John the Red-Nosed. On 4 strong men's shoulders, said John the Red-Nosed. That will not do then, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, what will do then, said Fessel to Foes. Big carts and big wagons, said John the Red-Nosed. Big carts and big wagons, said John the Red-Nosed. How will you cut her up, said Milder to Mulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. With knives and with forks, said John the Red-Nosed. With knives and with forks, said John the Red-Nosed. do then, said Milner to Moulder. Oh, what we'll do then, said Fessel to Foes. Big hatchets and cleavers, said John the Red-Nosed. Big hatchets and cleavers, said John the Red-Nosed. And how will you cook her, said Milder to Moulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foe. With pots and with pans, said John the Red-Nosed. With pots and with pans, said John the Red-Nosed. That will not do then, said Milner to Moulder. Oh, what will do then, said Fessel to Foes. Bloody big brass cauldrons, said John the Red-Nosed. Bloody big brass cauldrons, said John the Red-Nosed. Who'll get the spare ribs, said Milner to Moulder. Oh, we may not tell you, said Fessel to Foes. We'll give 'em all to the poor, said John the Red-Nosed. We'll give 'em all to the poor, said John the Red-Nosed.